Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
It seems to me that from the point of view of the overall culture of this country, that one needs to develop a greater feeling of comfort and understanding and literacy and a wider variety of cultural expressions than just whatever is at the top of the chart at the particular moment.
Tonight we'll talk about the government's role in promoting the arts with the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts.
Good evening. Frank Hodsell, who is now chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, has held a lot of government jobs over the last 10 years. He's worked in the White House, most recently as a special assistant to the president. He's worked in the State Department, the Commerce Department, and at the Environmental Protection Agency. Compared to all of that, his current job might strike some as being a little bit in the backwater of Washington political life. The National Endowment for the Arts is hardly known in this country outside of the arts community, but its impact is felt far beyond the gallery and concert hall environment. Frank Hodsell was in Boise recently for the opening of an Idaho exhibit of folk art. We talked then about the role the federal government plays in supporting the arts, the move to increase art education in the nation's public schools, and how much money the federal government is spending, or should be spending, on promoting arts in America. I'd like to begin with a couple of questions, I guess, about the Reagan administration's support for the arts. I know right now the Congress is debating the appropriation for the National Endowment for the Arts. The administration has recommended more than it appears the Congress is, or has recommended less than the Congress is prepared to approve. In some people's minds, I guess that raises a question about just how committed the administration really is to the support of the arts. What's the answer?
Well, I think the answer is that we are very committed to the support of the arts. President Reagan is on record in that respect. The only problem that we have is how we deal with this enormous federal budget deficit that stretches out in front of us, $200 billion this year. And given the fact that such a small proportion of the federal budget is in the discretionary programs, we are proposing a fair amount of constraint. On the other side of the coin, however, I think it is fair to say that ultimately it's the overall budget. The arts are a very small part of it that counts, and the President has signed interior appropriations bills. That's the bill that our budget appears in, when those overall numbers are within the goals of the administration. I think that one has to go, if I may, Mark, I mean, beyond the margin of difference in the budget. We're talking about much less than 1% of the contributed part of the nonprofit arts economy. So in terms of the arts economy, it's small. In terms of the budget, overall federal budget, it's small. We're talking about really margins here in terms of negotiating out a federal budget that is reasonable. What we are trying...
I might just say that
Sure.
The figure that's being talked about is somewhere around $162 million
That's
right
correct.
now.
That's what our budget is today.
Right, okay.
That our budget is today. And Jim McClure from the state helps do that.
Right. He is, Senator McClure is the chairman of the subcommittee that deals with this appropriation, among others. In that light, I understand that he is recommending within that appropriation that some money be shifted to spend more money on arts education.
That is correct.
Is that agreeable with you?
Very much so. It's been one of the initiatives that I think that we've made since I've been at the endowment. Indeed, if you look at the state of the arts in the country and the state of audiences for those arts in the country, one of the things that one discovers is that for a lot of people, the arts mean almost exclusively the popular manifestations of them, the top 40 at any point on the hit parade, Michael Jackson and Kenny Loggins and people like that, the popular films Return of the Jedi or whatever it may be from the film community, and the television shows of various sorts that have the highest Nielsen ratings. It seems to me that from the point of view of the overall culture of this country, that one needs to develop a greater feeling of comfort and understanding and literacy and a wider variety of cultural expressions than just whatever is at the top of the chart at the particular moment. And I think arts education at a young age is a very important part of that, and I couldn't be more pleased that Senator McClure is also very much in favor of that.
In general terms, as a society, are we very literate about art?
I don't think so, not certainly as much as we should be. On the other hand, a lot of people say, well, you know, in Western Europe, it's much better. I'm not sure it's much better in Western Europe. I haven't done a detailed study, but I think that's quite overblown. Essentially, the problem here is that the arts are viewed often as a frill, something you do after hours when everything important is done. And I think that's short-sighted in terms of those who think that, because ultimately, if you look at a society or a civilization, say 100 years from now or 200 years from now, what you remember probably more than anything else, what remains after all the rest of it is gone, is more often than not the art and the thought of that particular time. And if you look at the way, for example, American history is taught in the schools, we talk about the political events, we talk about the military events, the economic events, and so on. And a great many of those things are, in terms of looking back over a long period of time, perhaps less important than the art and thought. I mean, our country was founded on ideas. If you look at the Bible colony up in Massachusetts, the Cotton Mathers and Jonathan Edwards of the world who came there, and there were cultural manifestations of that, even in the Bible colony, as a part of education for them, to be sure. That's the way they justified it. But the artistic expressions were there, and they have been there in this country from the beginning. To understand this country, or to understand any other country, I think you've got to understand those manifestations.
This new emphasis on art education, or additional emphasis on art education, I know that your organization has been leader in the effort to put artists in schools, for example. You'll be doing more of that, I assume.
I think we will. Of course, we do that through such agencies as your own Idaho State Arts Council, which does a fine job here, and that's the way it should be, because education is a state and local matter. I think we'll be going beyond the artist residency program, which is very important. What we're trying to do now, Mark, is to work with the educational authorities in addition to the artists and arts institutions. That is to say, with the chief state school officers, with the principals, the superintendents, the school boards, parent-teacher associations, and most importantly of all, representatives of teachers, which ultimately are the principal resource for teaching arts in the schools, to try and influence them towards a more systematic approach to the arts. That is to say, it's not just a question of teaching some young person how to play the trombone for the football band, but rather, that it may be too, but rather it is a question of providing over time, elementary and secondary schools, a sequential series of arts experiences and instruction, so that when a young person graduates from high school, they will have some sense of, when they walk down the street, what the sights and the forms and the colors of the buildings and where they came from. When they look in a museum, some sense of the different genres of painting and what they represent. When they listen to music, the differences and similarities between, let us say, since I mentioned it before, Michael Jackson, and somebody at the total other end, perhaps, of the spectrum, like Schoenberg.
Have educators then been as deficient as the population in general about putting an emphasis on this sort of education?
I think it's been treated as an extra in more cases than not. And that's the thing that we're trying to change, that we're trying to bring home to people the points that I made earlier about, you know, what is it that symbolizes a civilization? And if it is the arts, then surely people ought to know those symbols.
I would assume that in some places, and maybe even in this state, that would be somewhat controversial with some people, to place that sort of emphasis on art education.
Well, it may well be controversial, but I think it's right.
Nationally, we've had a movement of sorts called Back to Basics, where we ought to teach kids how to read and write and figure, and that much else tends to be expensive and tends to divert attention from those basic educational needs.
You know, something that I think is interesting. I mean, I'm a suspicious character in this because I represent the arts community. They can say, oh, well, Hodsall is just with all those fellows out in the arts community. But the interesting thing to me, at least, is that a number of organizations and institutions very much at the heart of the educational community think that the arts ought to be a basic. For example, the College Board. The College Board has recently published a booklet which states what they think ought to be the basics for all young people graduating from high school. And the arts are right there, along with English and mathematics and science and computer science and so on. And that seems to me one example. The Carnegie Institution recently has come out the same way, and our own Commission on Excellence, while it does not put the arts as one of the basics along with the English and the math and so on, it states that for all young people graduating from high school that knowledge or some literacy in the arts ought to be a part of it, because it's the mind and spirit of our culture. And it's interesting to me that when I started down this track a couple of years ago, since I'm from California, I'll use a beach analogy. At first I thought, well, I'll put my toe in, and just as you were saying, I felt it would get bitten off and I'd probably retreat up the beach and go do something else, because I'm a realist about these things. The fascinating thing to me has been that bit by bit I've been inching out into this area, and I found a really surprising amount of support from people in the school system who have nothing to do with the arts for this, because there is a feeling that there is a need for more humanizing in the schools and for treating the arts as a serious subject, not just throwing a little bit of paint on a canvas or going out and listening to a record or whatever it may be, but having a systematic understanding of what these cultural manifestations are. I found more support from that from people that I would never have thought would feel that was the case than I imagined. So I'm up to my ankles, and we'll see how far we get with it.
There's a real desire in our society, it seems to me, for a cause and effect between education and the way people lead their lives. It's easy to sell someone on the idea that they need to be conversant with the language, or they need to understand science a little bit in order to get along in the world. Where is the cause and effect between being literate in an art sense and being able to translate that into some value that society can embrace?
Well, I think the cause and effect is that if you have some knowledge of a wide variety of art forms, you are going to have a better understanding of the societal forces that make up the society at any given point in time. I mean, to take something out of the popular, or, you know, that really isn't just popular culture, because they were represented at the Kennedy Honors last year, breakdancing. Breakdancing began as if you will, an alternative to street fights and gangs and the like in some of the large urban centers. Right. It has evolved from that into an art form in which the kids participating have taken great pride, and in which some of our banner artistic institutions, some of the people associated, for example, with the New York City Ballet, which is viewed certainly as being, how shall I say, unimpeachable from the point of view of dance, as a fascinating new series of developments coming along. Now, to understand how those forms were influenced and also how they relate to other forms of dance, it seems to me, gives one a better sense of you know, what human expression is all about. We certainly study language in English. We study poetry, we study literature. Now, that isn't for the purpose exclusively of learning how to write a memorandum on whether one should sell 500 refrigerators to this particular institution or a part of the public. We do that in order to have a richness of expression and alternative expressions to make us whole human beings. And I would argue that the cause and effect is in that. Let me go one step further. It's beyond the intrinsic value. One of the things that many cities discover when they assist the establishment of a critical mass of arts within their, you know, within the jurisdiction, is that it brings in new business, it brings in different kinds of people, it results in tourism, and it results in hard dollars as well. So an understanding of what the arts can do is also important, I think, from an economic point of view, though that I would put secondary to the first thing.
There will be some who will certainly agree with all that you have said, but will be worried about the powerful hand of the federal government somehow influencing or directing how that art education, or what is art, or how it's to be educated. Give me the assurance that I'm sure that some people would like to hear that the federal government is not going to dictate that this student should learn such and such and such and such about this.
We are absolutely not going to do that. For one thing, education in this country is primarily a state and local matter, always has been, always will be, and what we do at the federal government, at the Department of Education level, is essentially, there are some exceptions, but essentially is block grant out to the states and localities who ultimately decide the curriculum. In terms of what we at the federal government can do, I think it is the kind of thing that the federal government has traditionally done in education. It is to raise up good examples. It is to bring people together and in communication. It is to provide information. It is to do things like one thing that we are doing. We've entered into an agreement with the Getty Trust to try to put together a program on the arts for television for young people ages 8 to 10 in the home with instructional materials also for the schools. A prototype of this in the sciences is 321 Contact, which you may well be aware of.
Right.
And I think the federal government can help with that. It is one central item. But in terms of the actual curricula, I think all that we should do is simply to expose the various kinds of arts education that are available, what they have achieved in terms of value added for the students that have participated in them, and then say, here it is, states and localities, pick and choose. Here are the reasons, here are some of the examples, it's up to you.
Another effort I know that you have engaged in a lot in the last few years is to encourage a further flow of private dollars into the arts, into support for the arts. Is that successful?
I think so. I wouldn't say that we are the cause of the further flow so much, though I think we have an influence at the margin. As you know, in the nonprofit arts, the primary source of support is private and local, always has been, and as far as I can tell, always will be in this country. What I think is fascinating, and we don't have very good statistics, but the statistics that we have, which come from the American Association of Fundraising Council, shows that starting in 81 and 82 and 83, which is the last year that we have statistics for, that there have, for the first time since the mid-70s, been real increases, that is, increases discounted for inflation, in contributions to the arts and humanities. I don't have it broken out just for the arts, but that does not include universities or education. It includes arts and specialized humanities institutions. That is very encouraging. I think it demonstrates that more and more people, and the big growth area has been for corporations here, though individuals are the bulk of this giving. I think it demonstrates that more and more people in this country are saying, you know, this is important. The arts do have causes and effects, and we want them.
Is there an incentive now, though, for people beyond their good intentions to make that kind of effort to contribute to art?
Well,
are there tax advantages?
There sure are. Since 1913, when the income tax code provided for deductions, and 1917 on the corporate side, we have had deductibility for philanthropic contributions of all kinds, including the arts, and that does help without question. In fact, a lot of people complain about the United States as not providing the kind of public support, let us say, that the French government does, or the British government, or whatever. But those other countries do not have an across-the-board set of tax deductions for charitable contributions. And in fact, if you add to the direct support at federal, state, and local levels, the revenues foregone as a result of tax deductions in this country, you will discover that we are equal to or better than most of these countries in terms of per capita GNP, in terms of our contributions, in terms of the public contributions to the art. We do it in a different way. In France, it's the Ministry of Culture which decides most of what goes on. Here, it's lots of people, including my little agency.
And that, in your view, and I guess in the view of the Reagan administration, that's precisely the way it ought to be.
I think that is certainly my view and the view of the Reagan administration, but I would like to say it was also the view of the Lyndon Johnson administration, who established our endowment, because the endowment and the Congress at that time, the endowment's enabling legislation makes it very clear that while support for the arts is primarily, this I'm almost quoting it, I'm paraphrasing at least, is primarily a matter of local and private concern, it is also appropriate for the federal government. It was envisaged from the beginning that we would be a junior partner. I might add one more piece. Many of our better artists who have had experiences in Europe where in some ways they are better off because, for example, a dancer who used to be with the Royal Danish Ballet, who is now, I won't mention names here, but who is now a major artistic director of a neighboring ballet near here, told me that, you know, it's so much better to be in this country where there is a great freedom of expression, where you can take on new projects and there's openness to that. While I was at the Royal Danish Ballet, while the costumes were lavish, while the hall was always freshly painted and one had a lot of amenities of that kind, it was a very rigid process, very bureaucratic. I think our system works pretty well.
Let me ask you about some of the, well, let me just go back to one more budget question. With all that you have said here about the support and the proper role that the federal government should play in this area, will we see what? Basically a plateauing in terms of the federal support, in terms of hard dollars for art? Have we reached about as high as we're going to go in terms of a percentage of the federal budget that we put into this?
That's hard to predict, Mark. I think that during the period of getting the budget, the overall federal budget deficits under control, that there is going to be a fairly flat period in terms of art support. I don't see that changing if there were to be a change after the elections, at least not materially. I'm not saying at the margin it might not change, but I think that pretty well everyone has agreed. For example, the arts community in this last budget go-around was requesting a budget of $195 million, and the Congress didn't even approach that on either side, whether liberal, Democrat, or conservative, Republican, didn't approach that because of these constraints. And I think these constraints are there no matter who does what. Now, over the long term, I would hope that we would get the federal budget deficit in order, and I have testified on the Hill with the full approval of my administration that if this problem that we have at the moment eases off, that it might well be appropriate for us to have additional funds. I can assure you we've got plenty that we could use the money for. There are an extraordinary number of needs that could be met without in any way infringing on the problem I mentioned earlier, which is becoming the dominant source of support.
I know you have been traveling some in the West, generally a rural area. This state certainly would think of itself as generally rural in nature, a place where not all people have easy access to at least the traditional forms of art, symphony music concerts or art galleries or whatever. Are we making enough effort, I guess, not only at the federal level but at state and local levels, to provide access to people in rural areas to those sorts of experiences?
The answer is no. Now, I ought to expand on that. I think one of the things that we have not done enough of at the federal level is to consider this problem of reaching out to audiences in smaller towns and away from the major metropolitan centers. I don't think we can do that directly from Washington. I think we should help provide funds. That's not the issue. I don't think we can make decisions as how it is best to get, I don't know, a dance company or a traveling exhibit of painting or whatever it may be to some small town, let's say like Salmon in Idaho, or one might mention some others. One of the things that I've been doing, and my deputy, Anthony Turney, who has been in South Dakota, and I'd earlier made a swing in the South where some of the same problems exist, is to try and, at least get a sense of what some of the states and local people are doing for themselves. And I think what we're going to try to do is to develop some demonstration packages in some areas to try and reach more of these people. Now, what am I talking about? We're talking about greater support for what I would call the minor touring networks, not the touring networks that go to Chicago and Los Angeles and St. Louis and New York and so on, but rather these the kinds of touring networks that your own state council, the Idaho State Council, has been fostering both within the state and with the Western States Arts Foundation in an interstate basis up in this area, to get smaller groups and regional orchestras and local orchestras and exhibits out to some of these smaller places. There have been some successful examples of this in the other country. We need to help that. Another example involves the media. One of the things, this is not true in your state because you have this fine television station, but in the state of Montana there is no public television, to take an example. There, we with the President, as you may know, recently created a committee on the arts and humanities of philanthropists and people who are in the business of raising additional funds. There we are talking about finding, on a national level, funding for providing to libraries around the country video cassettes of things like Dance in America Live from Lincoln Center, which the National Endowment for the Arts has funded from the beginning, so that is available as VHS and Betamax machines come into increasingly prevalent use as a possible alternative if somebody would rather have that than whatever the latest movie is. So we're going to be doing that as well. And the third area is this arts education issue. I think artist residencies in the schools are probably most effective in rural areas. It's the only way that many smaller communities get a chance to have any kind of contact with any kind of artist, and I think that ought to be continued. and maybe expanded in terms of bringing in people who are not going to be in the schools the whole time, but writers, let us say, or readers of poetry, and help them to stay maybe in a town for a week to teach creative writing and to read their poetry, not only to the kids, but also to adults in the community. And I think there are other things that we should look at as well.
I just have a couple minutes left, but I'm intrigued by a couple of other projects that the National Endowment is involved in. One is a fairly major effort to preserve art and preserve such things as old film. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I'm rather proud of that. We've, for years at the National Endowment, Mark, given on the order of $500,000 a year, in particular for the conversion of nitrate film, that's the old film stock for most of the black and white film prior to World War II, let us say, into triacetate. The nitrate deteriorates, and we've lost over half our films, if you take all of them into account, since the late 19th century when film began. The problem with doing that...
We've lost them just because they deteriorate, they fall to pieces.
Yes, they fall to pieces. They turn into dust in the cans, essentially, is what happens. If I had some pictures here, I could show you. It's quite vivid. But the point I'm making is that what we are now we had done that primarily through the American Film Institute, two independent nonprofit archives from the Museum of Modern Art on the one hand to a variety of others at universities around the country. What we've done now is we have talked to all the major studios, the television networks, because video is a part of this as well. And we've gotten, I think, an agreement on cooperation between the commercial side and the nonprofit side. One, to establish an inventory on where all these things are and in what condition. Two, to provide online computer dissemination of this inventory. Three, to start the process of providing for sharing of not, a dusty old print that's got scratches on it, but providing for printing from interpositives or negatives of the, from the pristine original prints. And finally, to make sure, because this goes beyond the commercial interest, that say 200 years from now, that the best of our film and television is available in its pristine form. I think we're within inches of having pulled the television together with the film, and there's a certain amount of jockeying there. And I think we're off on the right wicket. I think it's a problem that can be solved in 20 years.
Well, there must be an hour or two of television that 200 years from now we'll think is valuable. I'm not sure that we could point it out today, but there must be some.
Oh, there's many hours. Playhouse 90, Craft Theater, Playhouse, some of the public affairs coverage. I think there's lots of it.
Mr. Hodsall, you're good to join us, and we appreciate talking to you, sir. Thank you, and good luck.
Thank you, Mark.
That's all for tonight. We'll be back here tomorrow night with other news permitting. An interview with a former Idaho political figure who's returning to the state after being away for several years. We'll talk tomorrow night with former Attorney General Wayne Kidwell. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.